All right. Happy Tuesday, everybody, and welcome back to another Learning Tech Talks, where we are exploring the landscape of learning, workplace tech, but we get into all things learning, leadership development, talent development. It's a wild mix of stuff. Today's topic is actually a very healthy mix of technology, leadership development. I mean, we got a good mix of stuff. So to navigate that conversation, I'm joined by Megan Galloway from Campfire, and we're going to dig into this. So thanks for filling in today, Megan.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, I say filling in because, and Steve, inevitably, I know you're going to listen to this, so I have to give you a hard time on this because Steve Arntz was going to join me on the show, and then he booked something else on top of it. So he said, "Well, how do we?" I know, so I have to give him a hard time because, well, I just have to do that. So Steve, whenever you listen to this, I still love you, and you can text me, and we can give each other a hard time later. So I'm glad you're here though, because this is a really important topic, and I know we debated, well, will we bump it or what will we do? But I think with everything going on in the space right now, talking about manager development is a totally important and relevant topic. So thank you. As we get into it, before we get going, we're going to talk a little bit about you and your background. But for those who are just joining, it's an interactive conversation. So I always like when people chime in. So if you're watching or listening, feel free to add in the comments. But to kick this off, Megan, you told me right before we went live, and sometimes I don't even ask before we go live, but I remembered. So where are you located? And your cup is repping it, so it won't take too hard to figure that out.
Yeah, it won't take long. My water cup. I am in Kansas City.
Yeah.
More exciting, though, than the Chiefs, which is very exciting as well. I'm also a Jayhawk. So the fact that we're 5-0 to start the football season is unheard of around here. But yes, I live in Kansas City.
Okay. And how long have you been in that area?
So I grew up in Kansas City.
Okay. You grew up around there.
Yeah, I did. My husband and I moved to Colorado for about 7 years. And then after we had kids, we inevitably made the trek back here to the Midwest to be with family. So it's nice to be back.
Awesome. Well, I'm where I always am in Waukesha, Wisconsin. What are temperatures like for you down there? Has the fall chill started setting in, or are you a little warmer yet?
It's still it's been actually beautiful. It's been like 75 and sunny. So if we could just keep this weather for like 4 more months, I'd be really cool with that.
4 more months. Yes, I would be 100. Even here, it hasn't been that warm. It's been in the 60s, but if it could stay like that for 4 more months, I would not have a problem with that at all. You still get winters down there, don't you though?
Oh yeah. And it's like really gray here in the winters. Is it similar in Wisconsin? Like it's just like a gray cloud over like the whole winter.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the whole winter, but yes, it's definitely more kind of that overcast. Then you add the snow on the ground, everything feels like it just looks exactly the same. And you wonder, man, can we ever get some color back? So I can relate to that.
Yeah.
And you've got young kids too. So you can relate to me as well, where they don't have the flexibility to they can play outside, but it's a lot more work sending them out the door.
It is, yeah. And we joke because like it'll snow in November, and then in like February, it's the same snow pretty much because it just like it's dirtier throughout the entire season and like sticks around all winter. So
it gets like hard and crunchy on top, and it's not nearly as fun and fluffy to play in.
Exactly.
I know. Okay. Well, so then also we're going to talk about Campfire, but how did you end up? You told me you joined in February of this year, so new-ish, but in the startup space, not necessarily so new. So how did you end up getting connected to Steve and the Campfire team?
Yeah, so I've spent the last 10 years in HR and learning and development. I had found a niche in building learning and development programs from the ground up for companies that had never had them before. So I did that at 2 different construction companies and then a bank. And then I started my own business and had met Campfire. One of my friends that's a leader at one of the companies here in Kansas City had gone through one of Campfire's beta cohorts. And she was like, Megan, this is like right up your alley. Everything that I hear you talking about, the way that managers need to learn, you need to check this out. So Steve, the CEO, and I got connected, and our mission and values and purpose were so similar. It wasn't hard to talk me into coming on board.
Okay. So, it was an easy decision. All right. Well, and we're going to get into that. We're going to get into that because, like you said, this is how managers really, what they need and how they develop. And for those of you who read the post, you saw a little bit into like leadership cohort, space learning, all this other stuff. So we'll get into it. But So you say you work at Campfire, which could sound like an outdoor sports equipment, right? Like, I work at REI, I work at Campfire. So when you tell people you now work at Campfire, how do you describe it to people?
Yeah. So I would say Campfire is a community-based learning program for managers that integrates technology into making that learning experience more accessible and inclusive for all different types of managers.
Okay. Wow. You see, you've got that polished. I like it.
Well, thank you.
Okay. So, which I think one of the things, and I've gotten to know it a little bit, especially just because Steve and I go back a bit, but you talked about this kind of space. We talked about cohort learning and bringing people together through that experience. So given the fact you spent time before joining Campfire, I am really curious because we're going to dig into actually what the experience looks like. So for those of you watching and viewing who go, I kind of get it, but I'm not necessarily visualizing what that looks like. We actually will show the experience a bit. But you obviously were doing this before. So I'm really curious what elements of this stand out. So when you say this is really how managers develop, what is it that really makes it different?
Yeah. I would say they're just through the last 10 years, one of the things that I've noticed the most about the way that managers learn is that most managers are really great at their technical job. They've been promoted to be a manager, and then they're really not given many resources to actually figure out how to do the work that is managing people. Like, I think people think that when they get promoted, it's going to be like just more work of like the same thing or like harder work, but like
Yeah.
more technical work really is I think what they expect. And
Yeah.
so like when you get into this real skills space of like what it means to manage and lead people, really that's not going to be learned by having someone stand up and deliver, having like instructor-led learning at the front of a room. People are not going to consume and actually retain information that way because it's not really real to them, right? Like
Yeah.
managers learn because they go through really hard or really fun or really wild experiences that help them understand what it means to them and the kind of leader that they want to be. So what I love about Campfire is you are able to get immersed into your own experiences, other people's experiences, learn from conversations, learn from the stories that you're hearing from other leaders that are either going through the same things you are maybe, or maybe they just went through it or they went through it 5 years ago, but they can still relate and you can hear more of their stories too. So it's like real world, what you need is that storytelling and that experience of being a manager in like a more immersive and accelerated format.
So I want to talk about this a little bit because I think this is a really important distinction because there seems to be two ends of the spectrum on this that I think fall short. On one end of the spectrum, there's this assumption that, like you said, once you move into a people manager, you should already know everything that you need to know because you've been doing the job and whatever. So a lot of times, and you hear this at a lot of companies, managers aren't given resources because it's kind of assumed, well, you know what to do. And a lot of times it's hard to raise your hand and go, I actually don't. I'm not actually sure how to do this very well. On the flip side, though, I've seen experiences that go on the other end of we treat you like an empty box who's a bumbling idiot and you know nothing. So we're going to talk to you like a kindergartner. And that can really be offensive to somebody who goes, listen, I may not have been a people manager before, but I've interacted with humans. I understand the genesis of how to talk to a person. How do you balance that line? Because I think if you go too far on either end, it really can be a negative experience. And I think getting that right sweet spot is not always easy, especially when you're dealing with a dynamic group of people.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's one thing that's really, I think, important in general as we're designing learning experiences is like if you have an entire learning experience already planned out, you get into it, you know exactly what it's going to look like from like A to Z, then it's probably not going to meet the needs of the people that are in the room because we don't generally know exactly what people even need when we get into the room. Sometimes, at least, like we like to think we
Yeah.
do with learning professionals and we do our needs analysis and whatever, but that's why I love the idea of like community-based learning is it's like, okay, let's get these people in a room and let's talk about like, what do you really need to learn about some of these subjects? Like talking about like constructive conflict is one of our sessions, like having conflict with people in a productive way. What's actually hard about the conflict that you're having in your job right now? And
Okay.
how can we help you with that thing right now with the tools that we have in our session and through the other people that have been there, done that, and had other similar experiences. And so honestly, like because I love facilitating as well. So I've probably facilitated, I don't know, 200, 300 campfires now at this point.
Holy moly.
There's never been
The
like
same
the same
conversation.
session. Yeah, not a single time. Even though it's like the same overall flow, it changes depending on who's in the room. And that's what I feel like we need. Like we're used to now in our society of like this instant gratification of like, I want to get something out of it and I want to get out what I need right now. So being able to pivot in that way, I think is really important.
Okay. Well, and if I'm hearing you correctly, and again, as we get into it, I'd really like to talk more about what the experience looks like. Because I think conceptually, sometimes we can wrap our head around it like, yeah, it's different. But there is this level of figuring out what the guideposts are and saying, we know we need to address this topic because we know universally every manager, regardless of whether you've been doing it 20 years or 6 months, you're going to deal with it. But it would be absolutely impossible for us to script out, this is exactly what everyone in the room is going to do, and this is their exact baseline of experience. So let's focus on the goalpost, have some kind of key discussion points, but then navigate around that and hold it a little bit with an open hand and say, I kind of like a learning tech talks. I mean, I tell people all the time, I'm like, I don't exactly know where this conversation is going to go, but I have some guiding principles to make sure that it's adding value.
Exactly. And that's so in all of our sessions, we have something called an MIO, a most important outcome. So
Okay.
those are like one singular behavior change that we want to focus on as a goal throughout the entire session. So we may go a lot of different directions with the conversation. And as we're doing the activities and whatnot, that will look different in every single session, but it all centers around the same singular behavior change that we want to get really deep in whatever way is the most important to that group of people at the time.
Okay. And so are you defining that with the groups for each of the topics?
So that's something that's already kind of predetermined as we get into
Okay.
the session. And
Okay.
so that's how we approach it is like, that's our guidepost is like our
Okay.
most important outcome leads to then every single session that we have also ends with taking action. There's like something that we want people to do walking out of the session as they're getting like
Okay.
back into their day jobs. So those two things are like always the same.
Well, and one of the things you brought up with so that's extremely helpful and kind of, we talk a lot in our industry about being outcome focused, but I think that's actually putting that into practice to say, you're going to come here and not lame Maslow's learning objective style things, but actually saying, hey, our goal is here's a behavior that we really want you to affect and change. And we're going to use this session to focus on that. How we're going to get there may look a little bit different. And so have you found that works with managers across really all levels?
Yeah, all levels and all different industries as well. Like we'll have some of our campfires are just for one organization, and it'll be all the way from their senior executives all the way to first time managers in the same conversation. And they're talking about what one-on-ones look like at their company and how
Okay.
that translates across different experience levels. And so the people that are more experienced in the room are serving as hopefully, guides and mentors to the people that are new in their experience. And then in the cross company sessions, we may have a group of like mid-level managers all together, but there's people
Okay.
from nonprofit and healthcare and tech and construction and all over the board. So they're getting to see the same topic, but from a lot of different perspectives and
Through a lot of
angles.
different lenses.
So it challenges their own assumptions and perspectives and what they think about a topic because they hear it from so many different angles.
Okay. Now you talked about, and again, for folks watching and listening, I think one of the things that's great about these conversations is we flesh out a lot of things that really can apply regardless of what you're working on. Now you hit on something that I almost hear it cut in two different ways when you think about how you're grouping these managers together, which is worth kind of pulling apart. So it sounds like there is an element of, are you doing stuff to kind of help organize them by obviously you're doing cross industry, which I think is extremely valuable, which we'll talk about that, which sounds like one way you're cutting it. Sometimes you're with people in your same company. Sometimes you're with people outside. Let's actually start there. And then I actually want to talk about the leveling piece. How do you see that working? Because I, over the years, have seen, I've seen it be extremely effective, but is not always super easy to execute. So how do you actually manage that? We recognize there's a need for you to connect with managers internally, but we also know there's tremendous value of you hearing from other people from other industries.
Yeah. So like some of the organizations that we'll work with their HR leader to say, what's the most relevant topic for you for right now for your leaders internally. And so
Okay.
we'll have everyone registered for that session internally. And then we have our catalog available for all of those leaders to then have basically like just in time learning on what
Okay.
it is that they like most important to them in that moment. So we have a lot of HR leaders at their organizations that will say like, our ask is that you come to our internal company campfire, and then you can pick one other campfire this month. Like you can be whatever's most relevant to you, but
Okay.
like go do one, right? So it's then they get to pick what's most relevant to them out of our catalog of like 40 different topics.
Okay. Do you find, and I'm just curious, since you're doing this with so many different organizations,
Mhm.
what has been the response on the like outside the organization? I think sometimes we have a very heads down focus on things, and there's this tendency to go, I only want you to talk to other people in the company, which I think is a huge miss. But
Yeah.
I'm curious, are you seeing more comfort with saying, you know what, it's actually okay for our managers to go talk to other managers? In fact, it makes them better managers. Or is there still a little agita around, like, I don't know how I feel about that?
Yeah, sometimes people are a little bit hesitant, and then it's interesting because we had a customer that was a little hesitant. One of their fears was like it was a really hot, kind of economic market, job markets. They were like, "Are people going to jump ship?" And it
Right.
was
Are they going to like, wow, those are the
right.
manager problems you're dealing with? I'll take that any day.
But it's actually like the opposite thing has happened because
Okay.
realistically, no matter what industry you're in, people are people. And so, like, a lot of the
Yeah.
challenges that you're facing are the same challenges no matter what industry you're in, what organization you're with. Like, there's good and bads to every organization. And a lot of what people experience are the same things because we have the same, more or less, external factors that are contributing to the way that people are having to lead right now. So, what we found is that then people are coming out of these campfire sessions, they're like, oh, first of all, I got these really interesting ideas from, a totally different industry and the nonprofit world. This is something that they're trying. This is interesting for us. And then secondarily, they'll say, also, I didn't realize that all these other people are also dealing with this. Like the grass
Okay.
isn't that greener because and I'm empathizing with all these other managers that are doing these same things and having these same challenges. And I feel seen, like, because I know that other people are going through these same things too.
It's really funny you bring that up because I hadn't necessarily considered that as a possibility where the very fear you may have in doing this as we're dealing with, great resignation and oh my goodness, we're losing talent left and right. And your initial reaction may be, well, boy, if they hear from these other companies, they may think, wow, I'd be better off and leave. When in fact, it's actually in some regards having the opposite effect because you can have this grass is always greener idea. And then you start talking to other managers and go, oh, I mean, you're dealing with the exact same challenges, albeit different. But honestly, it's not like magic and sunshine and rainbows over there. And over here, I'm dealing with it.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's
Okay.
really cool too. The other thing that I will say that's been so fulfilling for me personally is seeing managers being able to talk to somebody from like literally a different country at a different organization in a different industry and like be able to empathize with somebody that's going through that and make a connection that they would have probably never made otherwise, but now they've found someone that can potentially be a sounding board even outside of campfire sessions, like watching them
Okay.
interact with each other on LinkedIn afterwards. It's really cool. It's
Yeah.
amazing to see connections people are building.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that up because when we hear, I mean, so often we can get into the whole virtual versus in-person stuff. I've got an opinion on that. But when you think about a lot of the takeaways people have from honestly any sort of meaningful connection opportunity, it's usually the relationships they built with people. That's usually a large part of this. And a lot of times what then ends up missing is, well, but did you did you do anything different as a result of it? Or was it like, hey, it was really neat and I met some great people? Here you're actually combining the two, saying it's both and. We're
Mhm.
going to build those relationships. We're going to help you connect from a different worldview through a different lens. and we're going to do it around this. Hey, we've got this goal for behavior change, and you're going to learn from these. So you're really kind of blending the two.
Yeah, exactly. Because, and I say this in sessions all the time, like what we do in this hour is great, but if you don't do anything with it afterwards, then it doesn't go anywhere, right? So that's why we end every single session with this take action. And as you know, like it's hard to measure whether behavioral change is actually happening. But what we can do is through our app, we'll then, you'll set a reminder to yourself and say, okay, I'm going to take this action. I'm going to commit to it by this date, putting this calendar invite on my calendar reminder on my calendar so that I'll actually do this. And then we'll follow up and we'll say, okay, are you taking those actions? How did it go? And so trying to prompt then at least seeing, are people actually taking those actions? It's at least step one into trying to figure out how we can actually affect that behavior change more long term.
So I want to talk about this and transition into this a little bit. Is inevitably one of the things that I read in pretty much every research report is the burnout of managers. I mean, they're just swamped. They're getting hit. Good grief, every digital transformation, then this business industry shift, and then on top of it, they're supposed to lead their team through the change type of a thing, and cutting through the noise and saying, hey, we're actually going to ask you to stop, get off the treadmill for a minute and actually do something can be hard. So one, I'm curious how you're cutting through some of that noise and what you've seen work really well to cut through the noise, but also to your point of moving beyond this event where you go, that was really neat. I maybe had an aha moment, light bulb, and back to work. It's a little bit of a double barrel question because I hate when I ask those, but I am curious, how do you cut through the noise, or what have you seen that works? And then also, how do you extend really the impact of that?
Yeah. So we'll start with the first one. So when you come into a campfire session, we want it to feel like you're sitting around a campfire. We want it to feel safe. We want it to feel like a place where you can take a deep breath, connect with other people.
Okay.
So we start all of our sessions with something called a spark. And so a spark is like a get to know you. Sometimes it's a game. But it's like get out of your world for just a minute and
Okay.
come here and be present with us. And then in our technology platform, you don't have to leave to do anything
Okay.
once you're in. So, if we have like, a short video that's playing inside the app. If there's an assessment that you need to take as part of the session, that's in the app. Like everything
Okay.
is included in the app because there are so many distractions on, Slack notifications, LinkedIn, email, like you name it.
Email, yeah,
Yeah.
Teams, something's popping up. Yep.
Something's popping up. So the goal is to keep everybody in the platform, and then it moves really fast. It's an hour, and it is, I would say, 80% direct interaction. So there's really no place to hide inside of the sessions once you get in
Okay.
there. It's you interacting with yourself. Like that's the two main goals. It's like, am I connecting with myself as a manager in this hour? And am I connecting with other people in this hour? So those are kind of the two goals that we have for folks as they come into the session. Underlying is like, let's make time for people to have like before all of our breakouts, we do reflection because
Okay.
not everybody is a verbal processor. Some people like to kind of internally think about things first. And we also, to your point, Christopher, like we don't stop and take time to think and reflect
We
about
don't.
things at all because we don't have time or space. Like even like standing in a line as you're waiting at the like grocery store, you pull out your phone and answer some
Yeah, you're checking the like latest email or
notifications.
what's the next notification. Okay.
Yeah.
So on that point, and I like that you mentioned this because this is honestly, I think, not only just for what you're doing with leadership development, but this is something that I think is a really valuable practice just in general. I mean, I have blocks of time. I just think on my schedule to think about thinking,
Mm.
which that point of we often are just so busy with the day-to-day grind of I got to get to this, I got to do that, I got to do. We never stop and actually think or reflect back on, okay, what's actually going on? Even some of the things of is what I'm working on the most important thing, or should I bump something else? I mean, some of those activities. So it sounds like you're actually being very intentional in the design to say, which I think is missing from a lot of leadership development because we just got so much to tell you. We got
Yeah.
to talk at you so much. We got to pack your head so full of things. It adds to that cycle of I don't have time for you to really think and reflect on this right now because we got to get to we're 15 minutes behind.
Right. And too, like that's, I'd say one of the biggest comparison points that I would say from like a design perspective is our sessions focus on one specific behavioral change and
Okay.
go really deep in that hour, right? It's
Okay.
not like, let's give you a whole bunch of information that's kind of high level and then you walk away and like take maybe 2% of that away. It's like, let's give you a really deep experience in this one thing so that we can hopefully change behavior in one small area. And then to your second point as well, like, how do you continue this? Like, there's a reason why we're set up as a subscription. Learning never stops. And by keeping like these conversations about leadership development at the forefront and not having it be like a hit it and quit it type thing, but having it be something that's just continual, you're always thinking about how you can continually improve and change real behaviors and habits as a leader. That's kind of how we want to enable and support people, because it's not like something that you just do one time and then you never have to deal with
Okay.
an employee relations challenge or not knowing how to delegate things or whatever the topic might be, right? Like these
Yeah.
things they're pervasive. They keep coming up over and over again. So we want to be that continual support for folks.
So while there is the breadth of different things, because again, there's more than one thing you need to be able to do well as a manager. So obviously, it sounds like there's some breadth to say, yeah, we recognize there's a number of different things, but at the same time, we recognize it is physically impossible for you to do all of those things at once. So let's not try and get you to change everything at once. Let's take the time to say, this is a really important behavior. Let's actually give it the time and depth and let it marinate and actually go deep on this so that you can actually make a behavior change, get that change to steady state, and then layer in something else.
Exactly. You got it.
Okay. Okay. Um, so with that, then the second part of this, which it ties to the mix-up group, you talked a little bit about, mid-level managers, frontline managers. Do you mix up the categories? Like, how do you categorize managers? And have you seen value in shuffling the deck? Is it helpful to have people who are in similar type managerial roles, not necessarily industry, but kind of category? How do you structure that?
Yeah, I think that there's two things that we're doing specifically. So first of all, we do have tracks. So there's like single campfires, which is like a single session basically. And
Okay.
then there's something called a track. So for
Okay.
example, we have a manager essentials track. That's targeted to managers that have 0 to 3 years of experience. They're all
Okay.
kind of in that same kind of,
You're
spot
grouping them
of
together in
career.
that.
Yeah, they're being grouped together and they're registering then for that full track where they're going to be in a cohorted style environment with this group of people. They can also pick one of our on-demand courses that's like, okay, I think the one that's coming up later this week is on imposter syndrome. So it's like, okay, this is a topic that I'm feeling right now for me. And that could be something that like someone that's 2 years into their managerial career feels, but it could also be something that someone 25 years into their managerial career feels. And so that's something that, could affect so many different ranges, and the value of having different people in different places of experience is more valuable in that type of a conversation. And it's
Okay.
something that people are self-selecting into. And so they're
Okay.
like, this is something that's important and relevant to me. So they're more engaged in the conversation as well, right? Than when you're just saying like, this is one topic that our company needs, everybody go. So it seems like those are a little bit more engaged of conversations in general as well.
Okay. Well, and let me rewind that and make sure I've got it right. Because I like the way you frame that, which it's less about what is the right way to do it. And it's more, well, let's think about what is the topic or the behavior we're talking about and then define if that makes sense. Because again, I can see if you're talking about having one-on-ones, if you've got folks who've been doing this 20 years or maybe midline managers versus somebody who's just stepping in, it may not be as beneficial. I mean, there might be some benefit, but it may be out of balance because you have folks going like, I've been doing this for a while. I don't necessarily need to ask, should I do them or not? I'm more trying to get into the depth of it. So
Yeah.
I can see where that would be really helpful to say, hey, you're all relatively new. You've probably maybe kicked the tires a bit, but some of these topics, we're going to keep you a little bit more together. But some of the topics that we go, this doesn't really change regardless of tenure. And sometimes the value of somebody who hasn't been doing it very long versus somebody is actually enriches the discussion.
Definitely. Yeah. And so we have our manager essentials track, we're working on a manager of managers or leader of leaders track, and then
Okay.
also an executive leadership cohort style with an executive coach that we're partnering with. So we kind of have those 3 different major levels by tenure, and then the cross company catalog is available for then that kind of more mixed environment. So it's really, our goal is that people can get what they need in their specific journey, and that it can be more individualized for what their specific needs are, so that they're invested in and they feel like they're truly supported as an individual manager, because everyone is a little different.
Okay. Okay. So I've got like I said, I have a talk track, but I'm also trying to figure out where I want to go with this. So the other thing I want to hit on with this is related to almost kind of some of the skills as it relates to facilitating this, because what you described is also different from a facilitation standpoint. So I'm thinking to folks who, maybe listening, maybe they're a trainer or they're thinking about how they're designing things. This is also a shift for, I'm just saying, you said you've led 200-300 campfires. This is a very different experience for you leading that versus I'm standing in front of the room and delivering to everybody the 7 principles of yada, 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 or whatever. Was that and has that always been your comfort zone? Or is that something that as you kind of moved into this, you went, well, I got to use my skills in a different way?
Yeah. So like I've, presented at international conferences, and it's like stand up and deliver style. And I've always, I think, wanted that blend of more interactivity, because people don't learn from me talking at them for an hour. Like if I was just on here without you right now, it would not be nearly as engaging, because no one wants to listen to anyone talk straight for an hour. Usually.
Who knows?
They, at least not me, and that's totally okay. And so what I love about what we do, and I'm so glad that you asked about this. For me personally, as a trainer, facilitator, whatever you want to call, this role, I have been so much more fulfilled individually by learning how to be like, the way that I like visualize it and the way that we talk to our guides about it is, your job as a facilitator is to create and hold space for the room. So when you get into the session, you are creating that safe space, you're welcoming people into the environment, and then you hold space for other people to have conversations with each other, more than it is about, you having the answers, which is different to me. Like
It
coming
is
into this,
different.
like I was used to knowing like, oh, well, I've got this Brene Brown quote I could pull out of my back pocket, and here you go. And this can be helpful
Right.
to you. Right. That's really not, I mean, sometimes maybe it's relevant, but mostly it's not. If someone asks a question in the room, I usually deploy like one of 2 methods. Either number 1, I know how to make a killer pause. So I'll like just wait a really long time until someone pops in and like
Deal
talks.
with the uncomfortable silence.
Yep, somebody will. Or I'll ask the room, like somebody asks a question to me as the facilitator and they think I should have the answers. And maybe I do, but who says that I am the ultimate expert? Like this is a group of managers that are really there in it, going through it together. Like they're going to learn and retain so much more when I say to them, like, what do you all think about this? Like, what have you seen? What have you all heard? And now they're talking with people that they feel like really get it. Like it's
Yeah.
not like sage on the stage, like Megan knows the answers. It's, really that idea of like being the guide on the side, being able to create that space for everybody else. And it really is so much more fulfilling, because I learned so much, honestly, like in those sessions, hearing people talk about their experiences and the things that they're going through, and something that they're dealing with layoffs that are going on, or something that they're dealing with someone in a new generation that's coming into the workforce and they don't know how to talk to them. And there's like these things that people talk about that maybe there hasn't been a whole bunch of research done about some of these
Yeah.
things. And so they're figuring it out in real time. It's just really fascinating to watch.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up and sharing your experience with this, because going back to, you brought up imposter syndrome earlier.
Mm, yeah.
And the reality is this can be a bit of an identity crisis for folks who may be very accustomed to being the one who's delivering the knowledge, creating the aha moments, has that comfort level. And it can almost be perceived as this, well, am I now less than
Mm,
because of this? Or is it going to be less fulfilling for me because now I'm not center stage and I'm not the one? And I went through this journey earlier in my career and had a similar experience, but it was great to hear you share that, because I think that's sometimes one of the concerns we have with making this dynamic shift is, well, but if I relinquish control and just more become this, am I going to be somehow giving up something and less fulfilled? And will I be seen as less valuable in the room? And my experience has been it's a no on both of those.
Right. I think that people see you so much differently and with more respect when you are able to take yourself and your ego out of the room a little bit more. Even though it seems like the opposite would be true,
It's
like
counterintuitive.
it's counterintuitive. But then
Yeah.
once you do it enough times and you kind of get that, like it feels super uncomfortable at first, but then once you've done that enough times, you're like, oh, I'm like genuinely affecting these people. And for me, like I'm so impact focused. Like if I see that people are really genuinely getting things out of something that we're doing, then I'm like, yep, my job here is done. Like I feel so excited with this. And I feel that feeling so much more in what we're doing at Campfire than I've ever done, like speaking at an international conference or something. Like there's merit in both. But I will say that I feel like we're making a bigger impact, like genuine change in people's lives in the format in which
Yeah.
we've chosen to do it in.
No, and like I said, I just really appreciated you sharing that because I do think sometimes this is one of those things in theory. Our industry sometimes goes, we know we want to go there, but there's a bit of resistance because
Mhm.
it can feel like we're giving up. We're giving
Right.
this up. And if anything, similar to your experience, it almost seems like you're viewed as kind of this wise sage that you're not seen as less than like, oh yeah, you're just the one kind of asking questions. It's like, no, you're almost kind of elevated to this. I'm here to facilitate the discussion. I may even have the answers, but I'm withholding them to encourage discussion because I know that's more effective. I'm putting you first, which actually in many regards makes your role extremely valuable.
Yeah, more so. I love that.
Okay. Well, and I don't know what your experience has been, but I almost feel like it's a little less fatiguing facilitating that kind of experience than when you're on a talk track for a long period of time. I mean, it can be pretty exhausting. I
Yeah.
remember the days of doing the old school training, and it's tiring when you're talking through the same content. And from what you shared, every campfire, 300 of them, everyone's been different. So
Yeah.
what could seem like, well, monotonous, we're always doing this topic. It's like, well, actually, even though it's the same topic, I have no idea what that session is actually going to be like.
Yeah. Well, because I mean, that's part of what the beauty of this is like, and that's where I think traditional training misses is like all of us change. Like we're a different person today than we were yesterday, than we will be tomorrow, right? And every person in the room is changing in that way too. And so like being able to meet people where they're at in that exact moment, there's so much value in that versus just having something where you keep delivering the same thing over and over again and you don't really know whether it's hitting the mark or not because you're just, you're giving important information, but you just have no clue on how much of it is actually being retained or not
Right.
because it's harder to gauge the actual perception of what's happening or the way that people are reacting to it in that instance.
Well, and there would be so much variability. You deliver to one audience, maybe 40% is relevant. You deliver to another one and 2% is relevant. And you're going,
Right.
well, that's a pretty big swag in terms of value versus what you're describing. You're talking high relevance every single time because you're actually going back to a common term in our industry. You're personalizing that experience to the group.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about, I have one more thing and then I want to dig into the actual platform or the experience itself. So if you're watching, stick around because we're going to get into it. I am curious though with companies because I do see this all custom, too generic, off the shelf type of a thing, which you've talked a little bit about the personalization, but I'm curious how organizations navigate this because it can cause some agita of, whoa, like this leadership, like how much control do we relinquish in terms of what the topics are? And do we really need to recreate what a manager pathway looks like for this organization? Or is it pretty universal across the board? I'm curious what you see as a response from organizations and how you've struck that right balance, because I've seen these arguments derail more than one leadership conversation.
Yeah, definitely. I think that like, for example, with Manager Essentials, like multiple of the organizations that I was working with when I was building their leadership or learning and development programs from the ground up, They were somewhere between 300 and 800 employees. They didn't have enough mass to be able to like run a manager onboarding on a regular basis because they
Okay.
just didn't have that many people that were either hired or promoted generally during that time frame. They just didn't, they're too small to have that
Yeah.
kind of like,
So to dedicate resources to run this thing in any sort of thing wasn't realistic.
right.
So then it ends up being like, well, we'll run one a year, but now these poor managers might get stuck with no support for a whole year.
Right, exactly. And you've spent so many internal resources to build this like program that maybe goes once a year and
Okay.
it's not really as effective as you want it to be. So that's where I've seen like, especially in like new manager onboarding, we have programs running a couple times a month, starting a couple times a month. So it's like an easy thing that they can be able to say, like, yeah, this is a baseline for all of our managers by using Campfire. For our other sessions, I would say, like, it's really dependent on the organization. Like, we partner pretty closely with the HR leader or learning and development manager, whoever it is at the organization that owns their L&D strategy. And sometimes the answer is like, let's talk about what's most important to you, like what's going on in the employee life cycle right now. How are
Okay.
things looking in these ways? And so then we'll select things out of our catalog that are most applicable to them. And then the other thing that I would say as well is when we're meeting with those HR leaders, like I meet with our HR leaders on a regular basis. We do HR leader campfires as well. So like when you're
Okay.
a customer, you're coming in, you're not only talking to our team, but you're also talking to other HR leaders at all these other organizations. And we take so many notes through that because we hear what our managers going through right now. What are the hot topics that are top of mind to people? Because then as we're building out our catalog for our cross company campfires, we're able to say like, what are managers really going through? What is relevant to them right now? Let's
Okay.
put those things in the catalog because if it's not relevant to them, then it doesn't make sense to do it.
Okay. Okay. Well, and I think this gets to this whole conversation because again, I've seen and I've been in even more recently some discussions around this. Well, how do you navigate this in terms of addressing the unique needs of an organization to
Mhm.
make sure you're doing it while at the same time the point you brought up about scale to me is such an important one to consider for organizations. I think so often managers miss out because organizations can't scale. And as a result, the managers are the ones that suffer because it's, well, we either don't have the resources to do this or not enough people show. So we're going to cut back the frequency by which we do this. And as a result, then the ones who are there, they just can't. Or if you're in a company that's growing at a ridiculous pace,
Right.
you may be going, we can't run this twice a week because we
Yeah.
don't have the resources to do this kind of stuff. So I think that's a really important factor. And I like the way you described how you personalize to an organization without necessarily going, okay, well, if this is the campfire, we're going to completely retool the campfire for the organization. The other thing I would just add from my end for folks who may be listening going, well, I still, isn't there that unique niche for the organization? My experience with this has been there's still opportunity for an L&D team to build some internally run things that augment what you're doing with Campfire. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. You can say, well, Campfire can be part of this core, but then you recognize there may be a way we do performance management, or there may be an initiative at our organization that we go, yeah, we want to pull leaders through this. Let's make sure our experiences are similar. But to me, it doesn't have to be you either outsource the whole thing or you insource the whole thing.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Also because too, like having spent a lot of time on the inside of corporations, inside of organizations and being on that side of things. One of the things that's really important to me personally as we're working with our customers is like if we're going to roll out a campfire on performance discussions and we're talking about, how you're running your performance reviews, you're rolling out a new system. Let's talk about how that's working actually in your people practices so that we're not saying something in a campfire that then is like your leaders can't actually go and do something with. So we are very open to having those conversations with our customers as well
Okay.
and saying like, what are you doing in your people practices and how can we support you in that? And what does that look like? And how do we make this seamless so that we can, to your point, like it's not an all or nothing approach. Like we can blend what we're doing together and we're always willing to, chat through how we can make that best complement. And the best ways to fit into somebody's leadership development programs as well,
Yeah.
so that it, has maximum effect for sure.
Well, and just running large learning organizations internally, sometimes this can just be well, so are we going to offshore or outsource it, or are we going to insource it? And it's like, it's not an either or, it's a
Yeah.
both and. And I think what it does, and this is one of the things that I think some of the work you're doing and others in a similar space, but this frees the internal resources up to focus on what are the elements that really require an in-depth internal perspective, where we need to go deep on a specific internal thing. Let's not spend that time reinventing the wheel on some of these other components. Let's focus over here, design, deliver, really manage that. And then let's team up with something like this to actually allow the scale and support for some of these broader things.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great perspective.
Okay. So I'm curious, because we've talked a lot about it high level. I'd be really curious now to actually see. So for those of you who are watching, this is now you can alt tab back to the thing if you want to see what we're talking about, because I'm curious, what does a campfire actually look like? Because we can say, well, it's all these things high level, but one of the things that really, as I've gotten to know what Steve was doing from his original vision in this, the technology, and you mentioned it at a high level before, is designed as part of the experience. It's not an afterthought that's bolted on. The technology is actually fully integrated into the campfire experience. So I'm really curious what that looks like and how that all fits together.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Happy to show it.
All right, let me pull it in here. All right.
Yeah. So this is what it looks like when you come into the platform, to be able to see kind of this is that manager essentials track that I was talking about earlier.
Okay.
So once you register for something, like, you can see the different cohort options that are available. So you can get into there. This is the platform itself. So this is like a replacement for Zoom or, Meet or what have you.
Okay.
The idea is, like, we wanted to create a more inclusive classroom that, just better fit the needs of what learners really actually have the needs for during the session. And so really love some of the features that we have in here.
So before going into this, I'm going to back you up a little bit.
Please.
So with this, because you talked earlier about the fact it's almost a SaaS in some regards, in terms of like you're subscribing to manager development. So that interface you originally showed, it's almost kind of your manager's development portal in some regards, where it's like, yeah, you're a manager, you're part of this now, you have access to this broader capability of, there's lots of things out here for you to participate in. That's what that original portal was. So you can go, this is a really interesting topic. I want to see, when am I actually able to attend a campfire session on that?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And then even if, like, you went to a campfire session, you can go back into your portal and see, into your campfire page and see, we have something called a campfire card with every single one of our sessions. It's like an interactive tool that, like, you should be able to, like, pick up off the shelf and use right away. Like the one on constructive feedback, for example, like, you work through that session to make a real script of how you would want to have the conversation. You practice it with a partner and do peer coaching together on it. Like, you don't role play. Nobody actually likes role play. We don't do role play. But you, like, just, get coaching from another peer on how you were talking through it or whatever. Well, then you have that guide that you can use in your conversation, but then you can also use those prompts to do that again when you have another constructive feedback conversation to have again in the future. So,
so with this session, there's support resources that go along with it. Then actually going back to our earlier point of how does that then carry through beyond just the discussion, that's that component then too, to say, yeah, there's some resources that help you carry it forward.
Exactly. Yeah. That you can go.
Okay. Okay. So that's that piece. And then now we're in the actual, okay, so you're about to join a campfire, and rather than kind of going back to this user experience standpoint, trying to figure out different tools and which tools are we doing, the actual live session is integrated into the full campfire platform.
Exactly. And our goal here really with this platform is to give voice to the voiceless. Like, in traditional leadership development, the loudest people are the ones that contribute the most to the conversation, because they're the ones who are used to speaking up. So our goal here is to create a space that's super immersive in a virtual environment, particularly for companies that are hybrid or remote first. And then to really, give everyone a voice inside the platform. So once you join, it looks pretty familiar in that it looks like, you've got the chat over on the far side over there. There's this button down here that is your journal. So anything that you do inside of the session, any notes you take to yourself, anything you bookmark, that all feeds into the app so that you can go back and look at that later and look through, your notes and what you wrote and all that good stuff. We start every single session with a spark. So I would love to do
Okay.
this with you, Christopher, if you're open to it. If you could invite anyone to dinner, like you're having dinner tonight, you could invite anybody in the entire world, past, present, future, whatever.
Wow.
Like, who would you invite to dinner?
Oh my word. These are spark. I'm going to ask you if you know the answer to this while I think about it.
Okay, yeah, I can do
Like
mine.
who would you invite? Because I'm just
Yeah.
trying to think.
I think for me, I've thought a lot about this. I've guided this session quite a few times actually, and I think my answer changes every time. Sometimes selfishly, I'm like Brene Brown just because I love her. Sometimes it's Jason Sudeikis because I love Ted Lasso. He's from Kansas City. But the one that I think that I've landed on is my late grandfather. His name was Kurt, and my oldest is named after him. And he passed away when my dad was 3. And his life was pretty incredible. Holocaust survivor, he immigrated here to the United States, ended up getting his PhD at the University of Kansas. So my son, Kurt, would be 4th generation Jayhawk, so no pressure to him or anything.
Okay.
But I'd just be really curious to talk to him and learn more about his life and just, learn about my grandma when they met and, what their life was like then and just be able to just hear more. Yeah.
Okay. So see, I didn't know we could include dead folks who weren't
Yeah,
still here. Okay.
of
So now
course.
you're expanding this.
Whole
So like
world.
off the top of my head, one that would be really interesting for me would be I would actually love to just sit and have like a beer on my patio, maybe dinner, I don't know, whatever. But Martin Luther King, I actually think would be a fascinating person to sit with, especially to hear how his faith journey, like how did he allow himself to not get angry at the situation that he was doing? I mean, it was amazing the presence that he had at a time and I just relate to where we are right now, where things are so polarized.
Yeah.
To have just that peace of mind and that grace to go, I can stand up for something while at the same time being kind and gentle to who might be perceived as my enemy. Like to me, that would just be like, how did you go through that at such a time where it'd be so easy to just be jaded by the world, want to go. I mean, I could probably just sit and he'd probably end up having to spend the night because we wouldn't stop talking. So
I love that.
okay.
I love that. And like we just got like super deep in a short amount of time and starting to open the doors to these conversations. So even though you've never maybe met any of the other people that are in the session with you, you've learned something relatively
About them.
instant about them. And so it starts the conversation, and we have these like threads that flow through all of our sessions. So like in this one, this is our listening session. And when you invite someone to dinner, you're not inviting them because you want to tell them about your life. It's because you want to hear about their life.
From
You want to
them.
be like the best listener ever in this dinner, right? So like I said, like we build these threads into all of our sessions that make us go really deep into this one specific topic. So one of the things that I love about the platform too is like, it doesn't necessarily just like the slides don't have to take up the whole screen. You can change the size of
Both
the
and.
facilitator.
Okay.
It's so cool because you really get a chance to like personalize the experience for what creates the best space in the room. So, as I mentioned before, we love to do these reflections. Not everybody wants to talk to figure out, their own development. So we give space for reflection. So you actually go into a quiet space, like you're alone together, and you have this space for reflection where you fill this out. Everyone is still filling it out. You can't see or hear anyone as you're doing this. So you have that for a specific amount of time. So you finish writing through, all of the prompts.
So you can actually see when people are done with like, okay, I'm still kind of in thought working through this type of a thing versus, okay, I'm done. I'm coming back, connecting with the rest of the group, similar to a live classroom experience.
Exactly. Like it's very, very comparable to that. And then after you're done, like I said, that reflection saved into your journal. So you can always go back and look at it again in the future. And then the breakouts, like as a facilitator, this is one of my favorite features. Because how many times have you sent someone to like a breakout room and they're like, So what are we supposed to talk about right now? Because
I know, and they don't remember. You try and remember, then you end up bouncing around trying to be like, hey, how are you doing? You lose a ton of time in the breakout. So the 10-minute breakout ends up taking half
right.
an hour.
Exactly. So this is 8 minutes, but when we send you into the breakout, the prompt goes there with you. So then you
Okay.
know exactly what you're meant to be talking through. This little widget that you see here is still in development, but basically this is an idea of who's taking up the most airspace in the conversation to try to make that.
So by the way, I saw that one before, and to me, this is something that they should be integrating into every meeting as that visual cue of you are dominating the conversation. Shut up.
Yes. Guilty sometimes. Like I get into that space too where I don't even realize sometimes how much I'm talking and then I hang up and I'm like, "Oh, replay party. I just totally talked too much in that meeting." Like I wish I would have
Yep.
had some sort of a cue to
Some
not.
sort of visual cue.
Yeah.
I like
So,
that.
again, like you're able to bookmark all these things. It's all around the side there. One of the other features that I love, we call this like working together alone at Campfire. So in this one, like you're sharing your information. And if you were to go through around all of the participants in the room, like it looks like there's 14 participants in this session, it would take forever for every person to have their voice heard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Instead, you write, everyone has a minute or, a couple minutes to write. You write your entry. When you share with the group, you can then scroll through and read all of the different things that everyone wrote. And it goes a lot faster so that you can see everyone's responses.
Okay.
Everyone can be seen and heard. Yeah.
To help improve the virtual experience, because that can also be just a time suck where now the next 45 minutes is us just going round robin. Oh, it's your turn. And oh, Bill talks too much. So now, we lost a whole bunch of time.
Yeah, exactly. It creates this level playing field where you can actually have more conversation more quickly. So, and
Yeah.
then, like I said, we end all of our sessions to or with take action. So that flows into your journal. You can schedule, time to do this actually, and then when we follow up in our emails and whatnot, it all goes
Okay.
through there as well. So yeah, that's what that
Okay.
looks like.
So, and again, this is why I wanted to make sure we highlighted that, because I think being very intentional about the design of the technology and the experience does really make a difference. Now, granted, I think, with extreme execution, you can do it with other tools, but I like the fact that you've really designed the tech to match that experience. So it is really seamless. So with the time I have left, because I'm really curious on this, I'd love your answer because I've got a point of view, but I want to see where you go with this first. You often hear, manager development, it just can't be done virtually because it's just not the same as
Mhm.
getting people together in a room. And I'm curious what your experience has been with kind of a different design to the experience and then the technology to support it.
Yeah. And the thing that I would say, like, there's value to being in person. Of course. There always, I think, will be. There's just a different type of connection that's being made. Our goal is not to necessarily replace every single in-person thing ever. Our goal is to get more accessibility to managers that need this all over. That's one of the biggest challenges I think with managers and learning is we don't have the resources that they need when they need it at all different sizes of companies. And that's one thing that's really important to us is to create this type of virtual classroom that can be just as great as in person because you are getting such different things. You're meeting with people from all over the world and so many different companies. Like the value that you're getting out of it is different than in person, but I believe it's just as equal, if not more, because of the things that this technology is enabling us to do.
Okay. I love the nuance you had to your answer with it, because I think sometimes this is where we get caught up in the which is better. And it's like, that's the wrong question to be asking. It's
Right.
a matter of, can we create a really quality experience digitally? Yeah, we absolutely can. And so then you have to weigh your situation of saying, well, if everybody happens to be in the same room and you can deliver this experience, should we send them back to their desk and try and do it? Well, no, they're in the, but if you have a team, you don't have they're split out. Like, let's think about it. What's more important? Making sure they have the support they need right when they need it as quickly as possible, or saying, well, wouldn't it be neat if we could do something, but unfortunately we can't get to it for the next 2 years. And we aren't even sure if people can make it and budgets. That's where I think it's one of those, let's take the best of both. But what you've shown, I think, just validates you can deliver a high quality, impactful development experience digitally. And I think, I think that really represents it well.
Thank you. I love that.
All right. Well, with that, we're at the top of the hour. So I've got a few more things that we didn't get to, but I'm glad we got through the experience. And I think we hit on some of the biggest ones. So I genuinely appreciate you coming and chatting with me about this. Hopefully it's changed at least some thoughts on how you think about leadership development. I think there's a lot of possibilities we miss out on. And I think this was a great example of what good can look like when you do digital design for development. So thanks for being here, and thanks for sharing all your wisdom and insights.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. This went so fast.
All right. Have a great week, everybody, and we will see you next week.